Imagine a government that is intentionally spending billions more than it actually makes.
Right.
Like, they're literally ripping down their own historic monuments with a wrecking ball and taxing their local factories so heavily that citizens are just migrating straight to the black market.
It sounds chaotic.
It does. I mean, if you are just glancing at the surface, it sounds like a perfect recipe for a failed state.
Yeah, absolutely.
But what if I told you this is actually the blueprint of a nation desperately trying to fast-track its way into the future?
That is the real paradox here.
It really is.
Yeah.
Today, we are looking at the messy, chaotic friction of Ethiopia's massive modernization push. Welcome to a very special deep dive, coming to you straight from the newsroom of Addis Fortune, which is Ethiopia's largest English weekly newspaper.
It's great to be here.
I literally have a huge stack of this week's editions right here on the desk in front of me. I'm sort of flipping through them, and our mission today is to unpack the stories dominating these headlines.
Because there is a lot to cover.
There is so much. We really want to understand what actually happens when ambitious, futuristic development collides head-on with harsh economic realities. So, okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
Starting with the most literal foundation of the future, which is the power grid.
Yeah, I mean, it is the absolute bedrock. You simply cannot build a digitized, modern economy in the dark.
Right.
And the Ethiopian Electric Utility, the EEU, they are currently spending capital like an entity that completely understands this existential requirement.
But the math they're using to get there is just wild.
Oh, it is.
Like, looking at this report, the EEU just spent a record 133.59 billion birr last year.
Which is a staggering number.
Huge. And to put that in context for you listening, their actual revenue was only 118.91 billion birr.
Yeah.
So they intentionally outspent what they brought in by almost 15 billion birr just to aggressively expand the grid.
Right, because they're chasing this monumental goal of achieving 100% electricity access across the country by 2035.
Which is noble, but it gets crazier when you look at how they actually price the power.
The pricing model is fascinating.
They are buying electricity at about 6.5 to 7 US cents per kilowatt hour. Right.
Correct.
But then they turn around and sell it to the public for less than 2 cents.
Exactly. Which means they are taking a massive loss on almost every single unit of energy they distribute.
Purely to subsidize low-income users.
Yeah, it is an incredibly aggressive financial model for a state-run utility.
I have to stop you there, because that makes no sense to me.
How so?
I mean, that reminds me of a Silicon Valley tech startup. You know, just burning through billions in venture capital to acquire users and assuming they will just figure out how to make money a decade from now.
Yeah, the grow now, profit later mindset.
Exactly. But how does a nation's physical infrastructure survive on that kind of model? Especially when, look at this, the EEU lost 570 million birr last year just to people literally stealing the cables and transformers.
Right. What's fascinating here is the severe disconnect between top-down policy ambition and the physical realities on the ground.
Yeah.
The state wants universal access, so they mandate low prices, but by doing so, they starve the utility of the capital it needs to actually maintain the grid securely.
It's a catch-22.
It really is. And
Yeah.
you see this exact same friction in the transport sector right now.
Oh, with the buses.
Yes. The government is concurrently mandating that intercity bus operators replace 1,600 of their traditional vehicles with electric or natural gas buses.
And these aren't cheap.
Not at all. These new vehicles cost about 25 million birr each.
So on top of struggling to power homes, the government is essentially saying, go green, plug your massive, heavy transport into this exact same overtaxed grid.
Precisely. If you look at the reports from these transport companies in Addis Fortune, like Elmanson Trading, they are completely squeezed.
I can imagine.
They are taking delivery of these 25 million birr trucks, but they are getting absolutely zero help from the banks.
Wait, no loans at all?
No loans are being issued for these, so they have to finance it out of pocket or through incredibly expensive private borrowing.
That is brutal.
And it gets worse. Nearly half of that initial 25 million birr outlay is instantly evaporating into taxes and import duties.
Wow. So if you are listening to this and wondering why you should care about a bus company in Addis Ababa, just think about your own local logistics.
Exactly.
If transport companies are forced to buy vehicles they literally cannot afford, using a power grid that is losing money and losing physical cables by the day, who pays for that inefficiency?
You do. The consumer always does.
Right.
The National E-Mobility Strategy is pushing hard for this green transition, But energy experts are practically screaming about the grid constraints.
Because the math just doesn't work.
It doesn't. Imagine rolling out 1,600 electric buses. The energy requirement to fast-charge commercial fleets is massive.
Yeah.
Now think about placing those heavy charging substations on long, isolated corridors, routes linking Addis Ababa to regional hubs like Mekelle or Gojem.
Right, you're out in the middle of nowhere.
Exactly. You are placing highly capital-intensive, fragile infrastructure in remote areas where security is a very real, documented risk.
Oh, wow.
If a single substation is damaged, that is a colossal investment wiped out, and an entire transport route is just paralyzed.
So the takeaway here is that infrastructure is really a game of patience, but politicians run on a clock.
Very well put.
And that mismatch is what bankrupts utilities. The government is forcing a deeply aggressive upgrade to the physical infrastructure, but this top-down push is causing intense friction in the financial sector too.
Exactly. It's this.
They ousted the entire incumbent board of 11 directors. None of them were allowed to return.
Right.
And they held this massive rerun election at the Adwa Victory Memorial Museum, supervised by senior regulators.
It was a total clean sweep, and it happened despite the bank performing exceptionally well on paper.
That is the part that gets me. Like looking at their financials, they nearly doubled their gross profit to 1.8 billion birr in the financial year ending June 2025.
Yeah, their strongest result ever.
Exactly. Assets are up, deposits are up. But this massive fatal feud erupted over the bank's capital increase.
Because of how that capital was raised.
Right. Accusations started flying that new shareholders were illegally using loans originating from Ambisa Bank itself to buy their shares in Ambisa Bank.
Which is a profound violation of banking regulations everywhere in the world.
Wait, slow down. Explain the mechanics of that to me.
Sure.
How does a bank loan someone money to buy its own shares? That sounds like an infinite money glitch that would just immediately crash the system.
Well, it is highly illegal precisely because it is a total illusion. Let's break down how this phantom capital actually works.
Okay, I'm listening.
Imagine you want to own a piece of a bank, but you have no cash.
Right.
You use your connections at that very bank to secure a loan. You take the money they just loaned you, walk to the next window, and use it to buy shares in the bank. So on the accounting ledger, it looks like the bank just raised fresh capital from a new investor. But in reality, no new money entered the vault.
That is insane.
The bank just shuffled its depositors' cash into your pockets and gave you ownership in return.
It's like trying to buy a house by secretly getting the seller to loan you the down payment.
That is a great analogy.
You aren't actually adding any value, you were just structurally weakening the whole thing.
Yeah.
How dangerous is this for everyday people who just have their savings parked there?
It is a massive systemic threat. Yitzhak Tika, a former NBE official, was quoted in the paper explaining the vital concept of having skin in the game. If the institution itself finances your ownership, you benefit from the public's deposits and the bank's profits without taking any of the actual financial risk that ownership requires.
I see.
If the bank fails, you lose nothing because it wasn't your money to begin with, it was the depositor's money.
So you get all the upside and the public gets all the downside.
Exactly. And this brings us to the root cause, which is the NBE's strict 5 billion birr minimum capital threshold.
Right, they raised the bar.
Significantly. 5 billion birr is roughly tens of millions of dollars that these local banks suddenly had to scrape together just to stay in business.
That is a huge ask.
Imagine a neighborhood credit union suddenly being told by the government it has to hold Wall Street levels of cash in its vault by the end of the year.
It creates sheer desperation.
Yes. When board members act as proxies for specific shareholders scrambling to meet that threshold rather than acting as independent guardians of the public's money, strong profits mean absolutely nothing.
The lesson here is that phantom capital builds phantom security.
Well said.
So while national financial regulators are aggressively policing this future of banking to protect the system, city regulators are applying that exact same ruthless modernization logic to the physical capital itself.
They are.
But instead of sweeping out old bank boards, they're quite literally bulldozing the city's history.
Yeah, the contrast in what is valued and what is discarded is stark.
It's tragic, honestly. The historic Ethiopia Hotel is currently facing the wrecking ball.
Such a landmark.
It really is. This isn't just any building. It is a landmark on Johanna Street, constructed specifically for the founding of the Organization of African Unity, the OAU, back in 1963.
It housed the actual delegates who shaped modern African history.
But BK Group, a company that bought the hotel from the privatization agency in 2010 for 94 million birr, is tearing it all down
To build what, exactly?
to build a massive modern high-rise complex for the new financial district. And as collateral damage, it's taking down the Bego Adragat building directly behind it, which is a heritage site from the 1930s.
A building that housed generations of local businesses.
But the defense from the government is what really shocks me here.
What did they say?
The Ethiopian Heritage Authority essentially threw up their hands and said, "It is none of our business."
Wow.
Why? Because the Ethiopia Hotel wasn't officially registered in their current database as a protected heritage site.
That is wow.
That logic is infuriating. Is a building's historical value only real if it's written on a piece of government paper?
Right.
That's like throwing away a priceless family heirloom just because it wasn't itemized in a will.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is really about what a society chooses to remember.
Yeah, absolutely.
The demolition of the Ethiopia Hotel, along with iconic places like Cinema Empire and the Shiwa Hotel in Piazza, represents a city literally erasing its post-colonial footprint.
Just wiping the slate clean.
Exactly. It is actively making way for a highly modernized, commercialized financial district. It is the ultimate physical manifestation of Ethiopia sacrificing its past to fast-track its future.
But historians are arguing that by pulling down these physical markers, you are erasing the very identity of where the country came from.
They are. But the Heritage Authority argues that age alone doesn't qualify a building for salvation.
What do they look at then?
They look at architectural style and specific construction techniques. Ultimately, this is a profound debate over what survives the demolishing spree of progress and who gets to hold the pen that decides.
So the city is willing to sacrifice its history for a modern skyline.
It seems so.
But the government isn't just trying to engineer the physical landscape, are they? They're aggressively trying to engineer human behavior and public health too.
Yes.
And the results are just as messy.
We are talking about the implementation of what economists call sin taxes.
Right. Let's look at how people actually behave when you tax them. Back in 2020, Ethiopia introduced a major excise tax reform on alcohol and tobacco.
Following strict World Health Organization guidelines.
Exactly. The WHO logic is simple. Tax tobacco and people will smoke less.
It makes sense on paper.
And on paper, it looks like a massive public health victory. A recent study showed that legal cigarette sales plummeted from 278 million packs in 2019 to an estimated 91 million packs by 2023.
The legal market shrank by roughly 2/3.
Which sounds great, right?
Sure.
But human nature is far more stubborn than a tax policy.
Definitely.
The researchers from Harvard and the Fenot Project found that people didn't necessarily quit smoking or drinking.
They just went underground.
Exactly. The massive price hike pushed consumers straight toward illicit, untaxed cigarettes, like a smuggled brand called Shalman.
And toward unregulated homemade alcohol, too.
Right, like Reiki and Tella. Let's look at the price difference here because it's wild. Because of stacked taxes, a bottle of factory-made Reiki now costs about 650 birr.
Okay.
Meanwhile, the homemade untaxed version is sitting right next to it for only 400 birr.
And the revenue data tells the whole story here.
Tell me.
The government managed to collect 13.6 billion birr from alcohol taxes, but only 1.7 billion birr from tobacco.
So what does this all mean? Are these WHO-recommended health policies actually just functioning as a tax on honesty for the regulated factories?
While handing a total monopoly to the black market.
Yes.
That is the central paradox the researchers uncovered. Yes, the tax successfully raised overall revenue, and yes, it cut legal purchases.
Right.
But examine the mechanism of what actually happened. It drove the poorest, most price-sensitive consumers out of the regulated market and into the shadows.
Which is incredibly dangerous.
It is. You now have formal factory workers losing their jobs because their legally produced goods are taxed out of competitiveness, while untaxed, uninspected products just flood the streets.
But the Ethiopian Food and Drug Authority, the EFDA, didn't just accept this study, did they?
No, they pushed back quite hard on the researchers' methodology.
What was their argument?
The EFDA argued that limiting the interviews to just 3 major urban centers, Addis Ababa, Bahir Dar, and Adama, severely weakened any claim to speak for the realities of rural Ethiopia.
Okay, that's a fair point.
They also questioned the price comparison data between legal and illicit goods. But regardless of the exact data points, the takeaway is clear.
Which is?
You cannot simply import a first world tax policy into an economy dominated by a massive informal sector. It doesn't cure the habit, it just hides it where the state can no longer see or regulate it.
And this desperate migration to the informal economy is driven by one core issue, which is extreme price sensitivity.
We are hurting.
They are stretched to their absolute financial limits. Which brings us to the most severe economic shock currently squeezing the entire nation.
The logistics squeeze.
Yes, the soaring global cost of simply moving goods from point A to point B.
It is the invisible tax touching every single corner of the economy.
Let's trace the supply chain. Look at VegPro.
The flower farm.
Yeah, it's a massive commercial flower farm in Bishoftu that employs nearly 1,000 workers. Last year, a violent storm leveled their greenhouses. They spent months painstakingly rebuilding, only to get hit by a massive global shipping inflation shock driven by the geopolitical instability in the Red Sea.
Right, the shipping route.
The cost to move a single 20-foot container from China jumped from $3,500 to $6,500.
A near doubling of freight costs, seemingly overnight.
Exporters are bleeding out. Addis, who exports Ethiopian pulses and coffee, told Addis Fortune that they are literally shipping their goods at a financial loss.
Just to keep the contracts active.
Exactly. They're doing this just to maintain cash flow and keep their clients, because buyers in Europe absolutely refuse to absorb the price increases.
But there is a glaring irony here.
There is. Here is the bitter, glaring irony in all of this. While the private sector is suffocating under these costs, the state-owned enterprise, Ethiopian Shipping and Logistics, or ESL, just proudly posted a gross profit of 28.2 billion birr.
Wow.
They transported over 7 million tons of cargo. It was a record-breaking year.
Which, purely from a maritime logistics standpoint, is incredible given the regional security disruptions.
It is incredible. But hold on. How can a state logistics enterprise boast record profits while the country's exporters bleed to death?
That's a great question.
Is ESL acting as an economic shield, protecting the country from global shocks? Or are they an anchor dragging the economy down by monopolizing the trade routes?
Well, importers don't really have a choice.
Right.
They are essentially forced to use ESL vessels due to a strict government directive from the late 90s.
Right, so they're locked in.
Exactly. This raises an important question about the deep structural geopolitical vulnerability of Ethiopia. It is a landlocked country.
Yeah.
Over 95% of its entire international trade must funnel through the Djibouti port and up the Red Sea corridor.
That is a massive choke point.
It is. When conflict erupts between the U.S., Israel, and Iran and the Middle East destabilizes, the maritime mechanisms change instantly. Bunker fuel costs quadruple.
Yep.
War risk insurance becomes mandatory for every vessel.
And the ESL just passes those costs on.
The ESL argues that they actually absorbed a large portion of these costs to stabilize the local market, only making minor rate adjustments.
But still.
Right, because they hold a monopolistic position, even a minor adjustment ripples powerfully through the entire nation's economy.
And that macroeconomic ripple crashes directly into the dinner tables of the most vulnerable citizens.
It always does.
Overall, inflation hit 13.9% in June 2026, with food inflation soaring over 15%. Let's look at what that actually means for a real person. Addis Fortune interviewed a woman named Isias Silve Ashinafi. She works a formal job in communications at a hospital, earning 8,000 birrs a month.
Okay.
Her rent alone is 6,000 birr. That leaves her exactly 2,000 birr to cover an entire month of transportation, utilities, and food.
The math simply doesn't work.
It doesn't work. She actually had to send her 11-year-old child away to live with extended family because she can literally no longer afford to feed her own daughter on a hospital worker's salary.
It is a devastating human tragedy, and it perfectly illustrates macroeconomics at the micro level.
It really grounds all these massive numbers we've been talking about.
It does. When maritime freight costs for imported fertilizer rise in the Red Sea, or fuel for domestic transport trucks goes up, that shockwave travels silently down the supply chain.
And it lands on the consumer.
It doesn't just hurt the margins of the flower farms in Bishoftu, it ends up directly on the plates of citizens like Isias Selassie.
Right.
Food takes up about 43% of total consumption in low-income developing countries. When the price of basic sustenance gets squeezed, the societal foundation begins to crack.
It is heartbreaking. And economists in the paper are pointing out that the government is behaving as though it governs a wealthy, fully developed nation.
Yeah, that disconnect again.
They're pushing smart grids and massive green initiatives rather than implementing emergency measures, tax relief, or just basic subsidies for citizens who are just trying to survive today.
It's tough.
The takeaway here is that macroeconomics always ends up on the plates of the most vulnerable.
The resilience of the Ethiopian people is being tested on every conceivable front right now, by global inflation, by aggressive infrastructure overhauls, and by imported taxation policies.
Which really brings our journey through the pages of Addis Fortune full circle.
It does.
Whether you are an investor trying to understand bank capital thresholds, a policy nerd studying the unintended consequences of health taxes, or just someone insanely curious about how a country physically builds its future, you can see that a nation's path to modernization is never a straight, clean line.
Never.
It is fraught with boardroom drama, grid overloads, and profound human sacrifice. We're watching a country attempt to rewrite its physical and economic DNA in real time while its citizens try to hold the pieces together.
And as we close this analysis, I want to leave you with a thought that builds on everything we've unpacked today.
Let's hear it.
We saw how the government desperately wants to digitize the transport sector to track revenues. We saw how the EEU wants to install smart meters to monitor every single kilowatt and eliminate theft.
Right, visibility.
The ultimate push of modernization is toward total visibility. But if technology eventually captures, formalizes, and taxes every single transaction in the country, will the informal economy, the untaxed safety valve that people are using right now just to survive inflation and sin taxes, be regulated completely out of existence?
That is a scary thought.
And if that shadow economy disappears, what happens to the citizens who have absolutely nowhere else to go?
That is a chilling question to ponder. Because when you are completely rebuilding a house while the family is still living inside, you cannot afford to accidentally seal off the only emergency exits.
Exactly.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the pages of Addis Fortune. Keep questioning the headlines, keep learning, and we will catch you on the next one. Goodbye.